we're going to be diving down into what makes Team ANZ so powerful, but then also what that means in terms of the global scale. And I think there's been a lot of discussion throughout the day in terms of the importance and the necessity of scaling technology and innovation outside of New Zealand, but it's also a similar story for ANZ, for Australia. We represent 2% of all of the world's agricultural research. Yes, it's a great 2%, but we're conscious that we can't solve some of the big challenges that we're facing unless we really partner globally. And that's why we have brought the growAG platform here today. So we've been going on through a soft launch phase for a little while, but I'm sure you're asking, what is growAG? So growAG is an innovation platform. It's powered by the Australian Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and also the 15 RDCs, but led by AgriFutures Australia. And what it is, it's an online innovation platform that highlights all of the research projects from the rural research and development corporations, as well as some other fantastic research organisations. And we also share commercialisation opportunities. And that might be the commercialisation of IP that's being spun out of university. It might be looking for partners, seeking investment, and just bringing together connections across Australia, but then also across the globe. So far, we've supported over 150 million Aussie dollars, not Kiwi ones, but over 150 Aussie dollars in startup raises, which is fantastic. And we just recently celebrated our 3rd birthday, and now we are looking to really grow our partnerships in NZ and across the world. So 28% of our opportunities at the moment come from overseas, and so we've got 28 of those at the moment, which is great, and over 131 live opportunities at the moment. So I'd like to introduce, I've already said who's on the panel earlier, for those who are listening to the pitch, but really happy to introduce Kioumars and Abby here onto the stage. I promised that this session was going to be interactive, and it will be. So after I've introduced the guys here, we'll get into some Slido, but also some interactive discussion amongst the audience too. I've got 2 very trusty and glamorous assistants somewhere in the crowd. I've got David and Alex, who will be running around with roving microphones later. But we will need you to get your phones ready to activate Slido shortly. But before I get into that, I'd like to introduce Abby and Kioumars. So Abby and Kioumars have been working with the growAG platform for a little while now. And rather than me talk too much, I'm going to pass over to you guys. So Abby, I'll pass to you first in terms of, could you introduce yourself? I'm sure a lot of people know who you are here, but what you do, and then also why you're partnering with Australia.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Abby Thompson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Miruku. Miruku is actually a local palmy-based startup, but many of you may not have heard much about us. We're still fairly early on in our deep tech kind of development phase. We are, to put it simply, making plants that make dairy. And if we want to unpack that a little bit, I think very few of you would probably disagree that dairy can taste delicious, it has a lot of nutritional value, but that it's going to be impossible for us to sustainably meet the increasing global demands for dairy using our current dairy production systems. And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, there's in our mind going to be a place for animal-produced dairy for quite a long time to come, but let's use that in the food products where it really celebrates that dairy, where the dairy is the hero. And then let's look at other ways that we can produce dairy ingredients that we can use in many of the foods and beverages that we all enjoy, where perhaps dairy is not the reason that we're buying it. And so we are using the power of photosynthesis and the magic of plants to be able to grow oilseed crops that produce dairy proteins and fats in their seeds. And the idea is that those seeds are going to be able to be grown, harvested and processed using all of the existing infrastructure that we have for these sorts of crops and foods. but that we will then have this next generation of plant-produced ingredients that food manufacturers are going to be able to be used to produce all sorts of different products for hopefully millions of everyday consumers all around the world. So in terms of partnering with Australia, we've chosen to grow oilseed crops. Our particular crop is safflower. It's, I guess, a less well-known cousin of canola and soy. And Australia has got such a great heritage when it comes to growing oilseed crops. They've got some of the best farmers and growers for those sorts of crops in the world. They've got amazing talent around the R&D and the development, and also all of that kind of infrastructure. They have a scale that New Zealand just simply can't compete with when it comes to that particular type of crop. They also have a very similar regulatory system to us here. We do have FSANZ, for those of you who are familiar with that, the Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. But in Australia, their regulators are much more comfortable with the idea of growing genetically modified crops out in the open. And so there's been several crops that have been modified and commercialised. A safflower that has very super high oleic fatty acids, and a canola that has omega-3, so like what you'd normally get from fish oil, that have been commercialised recently. And so their regulators have taken those through their processes and given them approval for full commercial release and then sell. So, there is that track record there that we're hoping to build on and to be a third crop that's going to be going through that process.
Fantastic. Now, Kioumars.
Thank you, Harriet.
I know you've got a long history with Australia, haven't you?
Yes,
and we promise you this is not going to be an Aussie plug the whole hour. So.
Yes, sure. Thanks for that, Harriet. Yes, Kioumars Ghamkhar. I'm an Iranian-Australian Kiwi citizen, so I guess that's called identity crisis, but it's also advantage, I can tell you later. The fact is that what I've done in Australia and here is a mix of things again. My current role at AgriFutures is the director of Gene Bank or Seed Bank, mostly focused on forages for obvious reasons in New Zealand, but also other crops. We have wheat as well. But the reason I'm here on this panel is that I'm the founder of Map and Zap. Map and Zap is about smart identification of weeds. Good weeds and bad weeds, we do have those, believe it or not, but we can identify those, discriminate between them, and target them using lasers. That's for sustainable agriculture and sustainable control of weeds, and the farmers and industries are very interested in that from what we heard. And I'll talk about that a bit later in detail, but the fact is that between New Zealand and Australia, the reason that we're going to Australia is that between us, we both have the market, which is because our market is quite small for a country of 5 million. Bigger market, Australia, is advantage for us, and also on top of that, different farming systems in Australia compared to here, even across the states. I've lived in 3 states in Australia, so I know the history, I know the farming systems, and I know New Zealand farming system as well.
Excellent. Now, we've got the QR code up on the screen. It's very bright, but I can see some phones being held up, which is great. So give a little minute for everyone to join and sign on using the code there. Just before we do that, though, I'm just keen to understand, Kioumars, you made a comment to me earlier around considering overseas markets, and you had a comment from a potential investor that Australia maybe was not the right place to expand into first. Mm-hmm. Don't know if would you be able to touch on that a little bit more?
Yes, I mean, investors are different and they all right, I would say. But the fact is, I'm not trying to be politically correct, but the fact is that they're right when you talk to them. But from my point of view, yes, if you need to go to Australia and you just want to discover the market, you want to just learn about it, that's different. But for me, who lived in Australia for almost 20 years, and worked there in different states, you do have the market intelligence. So it's going to save you a lot of time from that point of view. We also have done visits with support from Callaghan Innovation and collaboration with AgriFutures, going to growAG conference and things like that. We've had opportunities to go to different environments, different farms, different farming systems. So we do have that market intelligence. We do have that collaboration. I know the research and innovation environment, and that helps. When you have that network already, then you can save time and get into the market earlier. So from that point of view, you mentioned, if you want to go to a big market from a small market, well, maybe you just jump directly to the USA for some people. But I guess in our case, and given the needs in Australia and New Zealand, which are quite similar but for different farming systems, I would go through Australia, and it's a no-brainer for me.
Excellent. Right. We've got... Everyone should have joined up with the QR code. If you haven't, it's there. But we've got a question now, and it should come up on your screen. So have you considered or launched in an overseas market? And if so, which market? Oh, can see also those at home, I hope, are joining in as well. Okay, so Australia's popular at the moment. Do the results surprise either of you at the moment? Kioumars, Abby?
No.
No, US coming back. And I think that's one of the pieces of feedback that we get in terms of our work on the platform is the pressure, but also the incentives that are available in the US, and particularly, I suppose, the scarcity of capital in the current market and the need to move over, to go and capture.
I think, to me, there's an element of risk and return. I think that a lot of the time that going straight into the US can be very attractive, but it's also incredibly high risk. And Amos is over there for almost a month at the moment, and this is not his first trip, and we have not had anywhere near the traction over there that we've managed to achieve in Australia, with much less commitment to the travel, because it's a smaller ecosystem. You can make more connections more quickly, you can find the right people more easily, and so yes, I think there's that consideration of what is it that you are trying to achieve, and what is your risk reward appetite.
Now, I've said I had glamorous assistants, and I'm going to throw to the audience quickly. I'm interested in the Singapore piece. Has anyone here launched in Singapore? And I'm curious to know what you launched and why Singapore. That must be someone online then.
Or is it a considering launching?
Yeah, or considered. Or if someone has an other market. Everyone's very shy. They're at the back. Come on, our assistants need to be a bit faster.
There we go.
Come on.
It was the Netherlands and Mexico.
Why those markets?
The Netherlands, because we were stupid, and at the time our assumption was that they are traditionally high-tech, so they would love new high-tech. Turns out they didn't. And Mexico, because we discovered that they are shifting from low to mid-tech to higher tech. And actually that's just gone off. It was brilliant. This was my former job, but it was, Mexico is an awesome market to get involved in.
Interesting. I did not think that Mexico would come up in our conversation today. Right, we're going to jump ahead now to our second Slido question. So, would you consider launching in Australia first? No? Big paddock, small market. You can reach the US or other markets quicker than you can say shrimp on the barbie. I feel like I'm not saying these properly because I haven't got the right twang. No, dealing with Aussie regulation is like trying to teach a sheep to surf. I feel like we shouldn't be rude about sheep in New Zealand. It's just across the ditch, so it makes sense. And yes, the developed and vast agricultural market is a great opportunity to test and launch innovation. Yes, it's the gateway to the Asia Pacific or other. Let's see what's happening. Yes, it's just It's coming back, that first one. Thoughts, Abby, Kioumars?
It's mostly yes, right? It makes sense.
I do think, though, there's always those case-by-case things. There will be certain things that it is the obvious and certain things where it may well not be.
Do we think that, I'm interested, we talk about gateway to the Asia Pacific. Do you think the Asia Pacific perceives us as being that gateway?
Probably not.
No, I think that's something that we talk to ourselves about.
Well, I think you start with New Zealand, Australia, prove yourself, and then you get there later. But yeah.
I mean, I do think that there is this interesting tension, though, between if your market is, if you know where you're going and your market is Asia, that actually what you prove out in New Zealand and Australia may not be the thing that is actually going to work in that market. And so I do think there is a need for that thoughtful consideration of what it is you're trying to prove and why and where the most appropriate places are. Because ultimately, I mean, we all hear you need to be working from your consumer back. And so if your ultimate consumer is absolutely an urban Asian city somewhere there, then I would suggest that may well not be the appropriate sort of gateway. But
From the Map and Zap point of view, of course, we're looking at Asia in the future, but it depends on the crop.
Yes.
So with the farming systems that you have to prove and establish the business here in New Zealand and Australia, of course the Asian market is bigger, but it depends on your crop. So if you're focusing on crops of interest in this part of the world, you have to focus here. But of course we have a view to the Asian market in the future, but for different crop. So that's coming later.
Excellent. Thank you. Right. Everyone's got to stand up now.
we have to stand up.
You can you can stand up too if you want.
There we go.
Oh, I better stand up as well now. So I need you to. Is everyone standing? They are. A very compliant audience. Thank you. So I'd like you to stay standing up if your organisation has sought out a partnership on a global scale.
Somewhere else than in New Zealand. Yep.
Yeah. So an international partnership of any kind. Right. You get to stay standing up.
Marie, stand up.
Stay standing up if that partnership was in the Asia Pacific. So a few sitting down.
Oh, I should sit down.
Now, sit down. You can sit down. Oh, stay standing up. Sorry, if your partnership.
Asia Pacific, not just.
Oh, yeah, you've got to stand for this
I thought
bit.
you were saying Asia.
No, well, Asia Pacific. Yeah, next bit. You'll be ruining the punchline.
Yeah.
So stay standing up if that partnership.
To the end.
Yes, thank you. Now you two need to be compliant.
Yeah.
Now stay standing up if that partnership was in Australia or looking to be in Australia. Excellent. So we've got our roving mics. They're not looking. Alex, you need to hurry up. Come on. They're not very good, these ones. I feel like I should have brought some different people with me. All right. So I'm interested. Who'd like to share a little bit about their partnership with Australia and what that looks like?
Or what they'd like it to look like.
Lady in blue.
He's coming slowly.
Yeah, slowly.
We need you on electric scooters.
Let's hope it doesn't take that long to commercialise.
So we've got a professor at University of Queensland who's asked us to send our wall blocks over so that they can trial them in their greenhouse systems. And we've also been asked to go and speak at LAMX over there and visit greenhouses so we can arrange some trials.
Fantastic. Well, you'll have to come to Brisbane next year. Shameless plug in terms of a vocag is heading to Brisbane next year on the 18th and 19th of February. So early bird tickets on sale, but that's really exciting, and we're partnering with UQ. But no, that sounds great, and it sounds like you're heading to Adelaide then for LAMX.
Definitely.
Very cool.
And I should add, those came up after we went on the growAG site as well. So
Excellent. Useful. Super. Anyone else who was just standing up? That gentleman just behind?
I did that for the timing.
Yep.
So I really, I'm well connected to what Kumar said, dependent on the crop. So we depended on something. My experience, we started in New Zealand. Like we started globally, but started in New Zealand. And there are things like if you are needing of connectivity as part of your solution, but it's not the main, so we better start in New Zealand. It's better here. On the other hand, if you need some government support, immediately go to Australia. So we've established a local entity only end of last year, and it's too many years too late. Because now we understand this advantage of having it. We always try to run away from it, additional tax issues and so on and so forth. But I think that's a great, great advantage. And don't ever forget the good things that you still have in New Zealand. The market will be there. We'll make much more money in Australia. But there are still very, very good things here in New Zealand. Don't close the New Zealand entity, even though it's 15% GST, or it's higher. But other than that.
And can I ask what state you chose to launch in? And was there a decision around whereabouts? Because I know, obviously, for us, federal system and some states have greater incentives than others.
Victoria, by far. Okay, we also managed to bring something from Western Australia, but I must say I was never really asked about where is the entity located. I was able to offer or to be a candidate only if I had a local entity in Australia, which I couldn't, I couldn't access without it. So I really, really encourage everyone to think about it sooner than later.
I mean, adding on to that, that's something we have been astonished by, the amount of regional or state support that there is available. And so, we are registered at the moment in Queensland, and, there are R&D co-funding arrangements of a minimum of 50% from government for you. But if you happen to be based in regional Queensland, 70% of your R&D for the project will be paid by the government, and only 30% by you as the company. Now, we haven't taken that up at this stage. We're not in regional Queensland, but it blew my mind, the support that was there. Similar arrangements in other states as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't really gone and established in Australia yet, but from experience working in Australia in the past, the beauty of Australia is the competition between states, so you can take advantage of that as well.
Well, that was a perfect segue into my next question, and this is for you, Abby, and it's about how you actually approach the Australian market, and what research did you need to do, which stakeholders did you engage, and how did you make sure from a launch perspective that it was going to be successful?
Well, we haven't launched yet, and so we don't know if it's going to be successful, so fingers crossed. I think that for us it was very much a case of networks to start with. One of the things we knew we were interested in oilseed crops, and so both the United States and Australia have got a lot of expertise there. And so we spent quite a bit of time looking at the different organisations within each country, what they had done, what kinds of crops they were working with. When we spoke to regulators, we decided that we liked the safflower crop, and then so when it came down to talking amongst people who had experience with working with safflower, everyone in the States initially was like, oh, we can definitely do this for you. And then they kind of said, but actually, if you really want the world's best safflower transformation guys, they're actually in Australia. And it was really useful for us to have that sort of cohesive feedback that actually there was this team that was amongst the best in the world in Australia, just over there. And then again, from the regulatory perspective, we spoke with regulators in many areas as well, and we really enjoyed the conversations we had with the Australian regulators. I thought it was interesting that on the Slido there were some people who were talking about, the regulations and the surfing sheep being a real problem. For us, we have been really pleasantly surprised so far, touch wood, with our engagement with regulators over there and how proactive and supportive they have been. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding when we actually submit our dossiers, but so far that's been really encouraging. I think once we got those sort of little bits in place, we actually made a very conscious decision to go over and spend quite a bit of time, because I think we've all been there where you get unsolicited emails from people saying, oh, I'm wanting to do this thing, can you introduce me to that person, or can you help me with this? And you don't really know who these people are, you don't really know how serious they are, and life's too short and you've got too many other things in your inbox. And so we wanted to make sure we were taking the time ourselves to go and meet people and to talk to them and to understand them and for them to understand us, so that when we then hopefully asked for help, they felt much more comfortable with providing that help, because they knew we were genuine, they knew that we were serious about what we were trying to achieve. There was credibility. And there was a relationship. And I mean, any of you who've ever met Amos will know that one of the things Amos is really, really good at is developing relationships. And I think, not saying that you can't be successful if you don't have Amos, because he's ours, but I think it's a really important thing of understanding that you need to take time to build relationships, and that is something which you can't just magic up. And so if you want something to help you, you need to put that investment in terms of your time and money going over there, but also spending time finding out about the other side, and looking at if you can find those win-win situations where, hey, I've got some stuff perhaps that might be of useful for you in achieving whatever you're out to do, and hopefully in return you can help me achieve something as well, because that's what's setting up a proper collaboration rather than just a transactional kind of a arrangement.
I agree with that. The collaboration is absolutely important, and having the skill to communicate and build those networks. Again, the reason that I said I'm going back to Australia first, the return to Australia is important. Sorry, it sounds like a movie title or something, but the return to Australia it's important because the collaboration has been there for me. I know the networks, I know the infrastructure. So to build those things, it takes years. So if you have that, and you know how to compromise as well when you talk to these people, that helps.
And I was going to ask around how easy it was to tap into those old networks, and is that through, and what are those networks? Was it through universities? Is it kind of corporate partnerships? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about Map and Zap, because you're asking about a long-term relationship building. Of course, I started my career in Australia, and I was across different states, and I heard here that Victoria is more open to tech, for example, than Western Australia. That's absolutely true. That's my experience as well, but I love Western Australia anyway. I was there for 8 years at the uni, but I worked very closely with Department of Ag, for example. So I know a lot of breeders there, a lot of farmers. So many projects that I developed, innovative projects, not just the boring business as usual. We went out, talked to the farmers with the breeders. We were researchers, breeders were coming from Department of Ag. We went to farms and we learned about what the problems are. There was a stage in Western Australia, I think it was about 2003 or 4, that farmers were actually complaining about drought and the forage pasture that they wanted and didn't exist to adapt the environment. So we learned from them what they want in a different space, not Map and Zap again, new crops, new forages. And we started an initiative with those guys. So the network was built, but started in Western Australia and expanded to other states. So it was called NAPLIP at that stage, so a national network. So you build that over years, and then I moved to Victoria, worked with Agriculture Victoria, which was being established then, and at AgriBio, which was again linked to La Trobe University, working there for 4 years, establishing the principles of agri-tech, using technology and new sensors for measuring plants. So you get to know over time who's who in Australia and who can help you. And then the industry, RDCs, 15 of them, I think, in Australia.
15.
Yeah, GRDC. I had 2 projects with GRDC. I had projects with former AgriFutures, Reddick. I had 2 projects. Reddick actually helped me establish my own business in Australia. Completely different to Map and Zap, but I had a business for the first time in my life in Australia, and Reddick supported me to do that because they said, we want you to do this. I said, well, I have another job, and my boss doesn't let me do that. They said, why don't you establish a company? I said, okay. And that was my first company in Australia, working with Reddick, and then I was connected to universities. I was connected to people who provided the labs and infrastructure. That's how you build this. So it's easier for me to go back to those guys now and say, here's the tech, and we talk to them, and get reconnected. Yeah.
And you both talked about regulation. I'm going to kind of just mention elephant in the room, both of you involved in gene editing modification. EU, what does that mean for both of you kind of long term? Is that something that, in terms of your area of tech, is it ever going to be on the horizon, or is it something
in the EU?
EU.
Well, interestingly enough, a number of the food manufacturers who could be potential customers of ours that we've been speaking to are in the EU. And they have the very clear perspective that, you know what, the world is a changing place, and if the EU is going to manage to hit the emissions targets that it has set for itself, that are fairly ambitious in a lot of spaces, they believe that they're going to have to accept some compromises around the gene editing, genetic technologies space. Ultimately, our position is we will wait and see, where we're not focusing or relying on that as a market, but we're happy to talk to those customers as a pipeline for out there. At the moment, obviously, with the States, Canada, South America and Central America, Australia and parts of Asia, we believe there's a big enough space for us to play, even if it doesn't change.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to comment on that, but I think it's inevitable that with gene editing things have to happen. I think they are happening in the EU already, but I mean, UK is, of course, a different story, but they're initiating it, and it's coming. You know, the fact is that big companies like Bayer are also promoting that, and I mean, in principle, it's safer than genetic modification in general. So I think it's inevitable, it's going to happen, and it should happen. Yeah.
Agree. Right. We're going to... Conscious we got the kind of post-lunch slot, so going to get everyone connecting a little bit more in the room. So we've got a nice little bit of space at the side of the room, but also conscious that if there's some little group, you know, if there's a little huddle of you already, what I'd like you to do is form groups of 4 or 5 people that you don't know. Introduce yourself and share what it is that you do. Discuss any experience that you have with expanding your organisational partnerships globally. And then consider how you can leverage your connections or networks with one another to support that or drive success for your organisation, your business, or agriculture as a whole. So I'm going to give everyone about 5 or so minutes to start discussing that. We'll see how we're going around the room. I've got my little helpers wandering around so they can see how we're doing. What I will ask, though, is that at the end of that time, we will be asking a few people to share in terms of a little bit around the connections that they've discovered as part of this discussion, and also any key takeouts with regards to that expansion globally. So, as we said, groups of 4 or 5, about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll share that insight with the rest of the room. Excellent. I'll get everyone to wind up now, and if you are keen to share, we've got David, who's still talking and not listening to me as usual. He's not listening at all. Well, no. We've got Alex with a microphone. David Lord.
David's actually leading the group.
I know, leading the conversation.
The centres.
Yeah. If you're keen to share, could you please put your hand up? I'm keen to hear about connections made and how that might supercharge your connections either between Australia, New Zealand, further afield. So we've got Alex and David with microphones. Oh, yep. Ariana with microphones. So, we've got the microphone here. Gentleman over there.
Sweet. Hey, you guys. I'm Caleb. I work at Refib, which basically takes waste paper towels and uses that for building insulation. We're still a startup, so that's what I'm doing. So what some of the others are doing is like commercialization hubs. There's teaching, like education stuff, and some other startups like robotics and things as well. Yeah.
And connections that you'll take from today?
I probably need to get them to know a bit more, but there's some really interesting people here.
Super. Have we got anyone else who'd like to share? There was lots of conversation. Or
just down on the front. Jacinta.
Hi, I'm Nick, and the group here is quite diverse, to put it mildly. So we've got a range of 2 farmers actively farming and looking at how they can do some different things within their business from a tech perspective and also from a product perspective. Both of them would be looking locally, domestically initially, but potentially for both there could be other markets. And then we've got the science support people as well, from Callaghan and also from AgriFutures. Interestingly, we're the one talking across each other around meat and the opportunities for quality products and how you process and manage meat. So obviously we've got the best meat in the world in New Zealand, so we'll be sending it to Australia in large volumes.
You do your clean green branding very, very well. Right, someone over this. Oh,
Alex, there was Jacinda up here.
We had a mixture of agri-dome, agri-nutrients, risk insurance, and agri-marketing. And one of the things that stood out for me was there was a lot of collaboration of ideas mentioned, well, sharing ideas internationally so we can grow. And just within this group here, AgriDome is looking at featuring wool products, a great connection there. And agri-nutrients, I'll probably plumb her depths of knowledge about that later. Great connections between us.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Jacinta. Is there anyone on the other side of the room? Brendan?
Two mics, yeah.
Two mics.
We covered a range of things. I guess when it comes to sort of expanding globally, it's quite specific business to business. So we sort of covered some of the advantages for doing some of the genetic work in Australia has been a real driver for several businesses. But one thing we also saw was in common, a lot of the global scale partners that we might want to form relationships with outside of the region will often look to this region and make very little distinction between Australia and New Zealand. It's one area. The number of times we've had large global scale businesses doing presentations here in New Zealand and just casually refer to how great it is to be in Australia, happens all of the time. And so there's a reality into that and there's a strength in that. And so, having that sort of reality around how the rest of the world views this region is important as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know the likes of someone like Innovate UK always make the most of, kind of hopping over the ditch between one and the other. Got time for one more. There was one lady over here.
Thank you. Kia ora. We had an interesting group. We've got 3 government agencies, 1 CRI, and I'm a dreaded consultant, so it was really useful. I consult in the food and fibre space, helping businesses write business cases and get investment. So we sort of quickly honed into a common issue about how difficult it is to access capital, which of course is something we've been talking about a lot, including access to government funds and the hard reality. We sort of posed a question, what can we do to fix that, access to capital? But the hard reality is until we change our government settings around the amount of funding available to incentivise and the ratios, and the hard reality that we don't compete with Australia, Israel, so many other, Singapore, other markets, we are going to see our startups and our established companies going offshore to do their R&D and to, access those ecosystems in terms of acceleration and incubation, because why wouldn't you? So that's sort of where we got to. Anything to add? Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. No, thanks, some great insights. Any points of reflection for you, Abby or Kioumars, in that?
Nothing from me. That was quite comprehensive, I guess.
Excellent. Right. So it's time to get back to Slido, and interested to understand from you, the audience, both in the room and online, what makes an international market attractive to land innovation? I hope we've got more than one participant typing. We've got 2.
They're pondering.
Yeah, everyone's pondering. And if anyone is feeling brave and wants to share what they're writing and why, put your hand up, and we've got our 2 mics around the room. So if anyone does want to share what they're thinking or what they put on there. So we've got one that says scale.
2 that have scale.
Yeah. Lots of scale. We have a small population, so to really have impact, connections, network, reasonable climate conditions, access to capital. That's a really interesting perspective in terms of access to capital, because if I was to reflect from an Australian perspective, we would say that we would struggle to necessarily access capital within Australia. And so collectively, it's interesting the different stories we tell ourselves in terms of, when I say we, in terms of, kind of different ecosystems. Very similar regulatory environment. Again, interesting. I think there is that really key, interesting piece around culturally very similar as well. Complementary knowledge, skill, infrastructure. Anyone in the room that wanted to build or make a comment on this question? No?
They are shy, aren't they?
They are, I know. Controlled environment, access to capital. Now, I'm really interested on this access to capital point, and I'll throw it to you two first, and maybe someone in the audience will be brave. When we talk about capital, it's a really interesting discussion, and quite often, I think we run the growAG event, and quite often we get the feedback that everyone always wants to talk about venture. But that's not the only source of capital. What is it that you're looking for in terms of capital perspective?
Me first?
Yeah, I'll go to you first.
Well, I guess from Map and Zap point of view, I wouldn't hold my breath on Australia for access to capital. It's more of a testing bed.
Yeah.
And collaboration, building collaboration and proving the business. Because I think to get access to the real capital, you have to go to US or Europe or, those areas really. Because if you want to scale your business, if you want to have a small one, that's okay. You can stay and hope that you get capital here. But if you really want to expand and scale for different environments, different type of farms for Map and Zap, then you need to look at those regions of the world. The fact is that the markets here are still small collectively, but it's very good to prove your system and that it works in different environments, different conditions.
Yeah, so it's capital plus.
Yes.
More partnerships, and when you have the partnerships, that proves your customer base and
absolutely,
commercialisation.
And collectively approach to the capital.
Yeah. There's an interesting comment that came in there in terms of following in footsteps, and in terms of other innovators who have been there before and sharing those networks. There's real impact, isn't there, in having those meaningful connections and warm introductions.
Yeah, of course, unless if there is an initiative between the two governments to lift the game a little bit. And
I think just on capital, we've been very fortunate that so far we've had 2 raises of just around $12 million total, and the vast majority of that has come from New Zealand. And so although there is, again, you talk about the narrative we tell ourselves that, there isn't enough capital here, for us at least, New Zealand has been the most supportive VC community we could have wished for.
Yeah.
We are not going to Australia for capital. We're going there for all those other things. But we hope that breadth of extra collaborative opportunity and route to market that we see there will help us get capital possibly from the States and others when we need to go bigger than what New Zealand is able to provide for hopefully our Series A.
It's so important now in terms of that raising that capital, isn't it? Once upon a time, you could raise capital on an idea, and it's just not the case anymore. Right, we'll jump to another question. Perception of the Australian agri-food tech and innovation ecosystem. So we'll keep this one short and snappy. There's only one person who has a thought on this one. Kioumars, you've lived there. looking at it now? Has it changed?
Australia.
Yeah.
I'm sure it has, but yeah, I mean, we can talk about challenges there as well as here. But the fact is that collectively, Australia and New Zealand together is a very attractive model for me. It has changed, but I have to say, as an Australian who moved to New Zealand and became a Kiwi, I have to say that New Zealand farmers are more receptive in terms of adopting the tech.
Yeah.
But it has changed, of course. I've seen farmers in Victoria, in South Australia, who are really keen to adopt the technology and go to the innovation space. Whereas, let's say, in Western Australia, for example, it was much harder to do that. I'm talking about 10, 11 years ago, or even more. But it has changed, of course.
Yeah. Some great... Abby, anything jumping out from you in terms of what's on the screen there?
I mean, bigger, yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah.
Bigger isn't always better, though.
No, and I know that up there's some not so positive things as well, disjointed and that as well. And I think there is always those bits that will work well and the bits that will not work so well. I mean, I find it interesting when we first had publicity about Miruku and what we were doing in the media. We were proactively approached by almost every university in Australia saying, hey, we've seen what you're doing, we think this. And this is before we even realised we were going to be setting up in Australia in any way. We see what you're doing, we think this is amazing, is there any way we can support you? Here are some of the things that we're doing that might be of interest to you. And we didn't get approached by, I think, any of the New Zealand universities proactively. We're working with some, but, and to me it was interesting, that proactivity that they had there. And I think, everyone who's in New Zealand knows that the New Zealand universities are having a bit of a tough time at the moment. And so perhaps there's not that same ability to lift your head up and look out at what might be. But it was a real interesting contrast to us.
Yeah. There's some real paradigms and opposites when you look at this word cloud up on the board. Really, really interesting.
Connected and disjointed are both the same size. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess just remember something about this is an important, interesting case that if we work together, things will be much better. I mean, there was a conference in Australia, Hort Connections,
yes,
to 2023. And at that meeting, we went to breakfast. We invited Vegetables NZ and Hort Innovation. Vegetables NZ from New Zealand, of course, Hort Innovation from Australia. And we introduced them to each other. Can you believe that? So Map and Zap brought these guys around the breakfast table, and we talked, and everyone was happy. Everyone said they want to collaborate. But this was the first time they were meeting.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. So, but that's what I mean. The chemistry is there. If
the
you can link them
connections
together, but they didn't talk to each other in the past.
Silos.
So they showed common interest in Map and Zap, and that was interesting. But they never met before.
And I think that's this thing of how do we... It's hard enough in New Zealand, and I suspect in Australia too, to stop regions trying to compete against other regions, let alone be able to say, well, actually, how can we be more collaborative as both countries and see the opportunities are big enough in the world for us, and we will achieve more and achieve better outcomes if we do more to work together rather than just trying to scrap over things. But easier said than done.
Yeah, and we've got one more question here in terms of what challenges we've been positive, also discussed some of the challenges, but keen to understand from an audience perspective kind of what challenges both Australia and New Zealand share in terms of what we and how we can drive collaboration. So let's have a look. Connectivity. I assume that's probably a shared challenge if we're talking about Australia. Farmer adoption of new tech. I was talking to someone this morning about extension and adoption and readiness levels of producers. It's a real challenging one. And I'm going to give a good plug here in terms of, so we talked about the growAG platform, but behind the platform there's also a concierge team. So whilst I was being rude to David, who was running around the room, but David, Ariana, who are here, they're part of our concierge team. So behind the digital interface, we do actually have a team of engagement managers that work to connect. So they've been working with Kioumars, Abby and Amos in terms of really helping build out the connections. So I do encourage you to sign up to the growAG growAG platform, but also reach out and inquire or, speak to David and Ariana. So there's so climate that's really interesting, isn't it, in terms of that being one of our biggest challenges. And I know as a parent, it's something that, does keep you awake at night. You can either stick your head in the sand or...
I personally like to see sustainable agriculture as the biggest, the boldest matter between the two countries as a challenge. I mean, yes, climate does address that to some extent, and I'm sure sustainability is somewhere sustainable agriculture, but I think that's what the two countries are struggling to have in their practice. We're being questioned for our, what makes our, runs our economy basically, which is agriculture. So do it in a sustainable way, different for New Zealand and Australia, of course. We release a lot of methane in New Zealand per head. In Australia, you have soil erosion issues and that. So I guess sustainability, but also competition. When I talk to people in New Zealand and Australia, when I talk about Map and Zap, they say, but, somebody is doing targeted spraying. Okay, so what? I'm not going to replace spraying. This is, an addition to other technologies. So if we have that perception of everyone can work together, that's another challenge, that people are not looking at things as that. When you go and say, I have a tech, they say, well, somebody else also has it. But this is different, and it's not going to replace it.
Yeah.
It's going to fill the gap.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's fantastic to see, I think, the investment now coming in to really think about how we address the sustainability challenge and look towards net zero or net positive. Really running out of time, but just interesting as well on farm trials. So been really fortunate to head to Europe recently, and there's a real passion, I think, or desire from Europe, particularly and also the US to partner with Team ANZ as such in terms of farm trials. So I think that's one thing that we can continue to look to support and really support that counter seasonal piece, because from an iteration cycle perspective, it makes it so much faster. So thank you for sharing, everyone. And we won't probably have time to get to that last Slido question, but I just wanted to thank Abby and Kioumars for joining, and I also wanted to thank you, the audience, in terms of being really supportive and forthcoming in sharing during that session. Got some fantastic insights as well, which is always great for us. Would encourage you to reach out to the growAG team. Really happy to, really keen to build out our organisational profiles and think about how we can support you making those connections both within Australia and internationally as well. So once again, thank you, Abby. Thank you, Kioumars, for taking part in this interactive session, a little bit different. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it, and have a good afternoon.